And then, of course, in 1998, a seminal moment for us as a generation of activists was the killing of Gugu Dlamini. So Gugu Dlamini was an activist who was who lived just outside Durban. It was World AIDS Day. Remember, this is a moment in which it is very, very dangerous to say that you are a person living with HIV. There is a huge amount of stigma. So even the fact that I was friends with people who are living with HIV, that was very much something of my generation and very much something that was still very new at a broader level. And so Gugu Dlamini's death kind of jolted us out of this sense that we were all able to be friends and that we were going to fight this fight together and we were going to do HIV prevention and it was about getting condoms into universities. Like, that was very much our mindset. And Gugu's death was like, oh, people are going to kill other people on the basis that they have HIV. Like, this is a whole different level of stigma and discrimination that we need to think about. So it was a very galvanizing moment. So that was that was a really seminal moment. And of course, out of the death of Gugu Dlamini comes the birth of the Treatment Action Campaign and a whole bunch of activism that then sort of redefined our generation, and certainly the struggle for prevention, the struggle for medicines, et cetera, et cetera. The timing for a new Black government in South Africa that has finally been able to overthrow apartheid is heartbreaking, right? To have one of we always knew that what we would inherit is this massive problem of white supremacy and this massive problem of freedom, of having to define economic justice for all of these people, right? We knew that the resources that the old apartheid state had would never be enough and that this was going to be a huge battle. I think what the ANC government didn't reckon with and didn't fully understand was that it was also inheriting this silent disease that had been growing and then only became very apparent within the first 5 years of the new democracy. So that was, at a kind of psychic level, devastating. So at the AIDS conference, Mbeki essentially comes out fully as an AIDS denialist, and then we all realize what the nature of the task is that is before us, which is that we have to both fight for treatment access, not just with the rest of the world and pharmaceuticals, which was going to be a battle in and of itself. We also had to deal with stigma and discrimination against people simply because they were having sex, because they were either sex workers, because they were men who had sex with men, because they were women who didn't have the power in their relationships to control their sexuality, didn't have a bodily autonomy. We had all of that cluster of human rights issues, and we had to defend and protect that group of people in whom we saw ourselves. We were fighting for ourselves. That's a very important framing for me, that we were not just fighting for those people, we were fighting for ourselves, our generation. And then on top of that, we were going to also have to fight our own government, which was a beacon of human rights, which we had seen as being the biggest ally we had in fighting the pharmaceuticals and in defending and protecting human rights of the most vulnerable people in our society. So it was a very complicated and very difficult time. And so I remember having a conversation with Tawanda Mutasa, who was the executive director at the time, and he said, you should come work for us. And I said, who are you? Like, what do you guys do? And he explained what OSF was, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. But more importantly, he said, we have a blank slate, and you can come in and decide what our work is going to look like at the intersection of health and human rights. And we don't know what that's supposed to look like in Southern Africa. We know that it's going to look different from what it looks like anywhere else in the world, because HIV is the thing that drives our what our public health profile looks like at the moment. And so come and let's think about it together. And so that was a very attractive proposition, especially because I was super young. And so I was like, yeah. I'll never forget going to Malawi. It was very early in my time at OSISA, and we were still trying to figure out what we were going to do. And of course, my stuff is always around advocacy and how we move forward, how we push the barriers, how we're dealing with the structural stuff. That's always where my head is at, of course. And I went to a clinic, and it was the first time that I had seen somebody literally being pushed in a wheelbarrow. She was in a wheelbarrow. She was very, very sick. And she had all the telltale signs of late stage AIDS. And that was very, very confronting. And there were lots of very difficult moments of watching people that you loved actually get very, very sick and die. Because that was the context in which we were working, is that actually people were dying. Lots of people are not here anymore. And that was hard. But I suppose the stuff that I loved doing was working with activists and developing schemes where we realized this is really smart, like the stuff around country coordinating mechanisms and getting people to be ready for those processes. And what happened was activist organizations were very, very ready for those country proposals in ways that everyone else in the country sometimes weren't, because they hadn't realized it, right? I think that my philosophy was that everybody in my part of the world should have everything that I have. That was my philosophy. Because I was profoundly aware that my generation of South Africans who were raised in exile were raised with the idea that one day Nelson Mandela would be free. We would come home and we would run the government. Like, it was that specific. Like, so even when he had been on Robben Island for years and years, and nobody believed that Nelson Mandela would ever be released, because what reason was there to believe that that would ever happen? In the depths of, the 1970s and 1980s, when, Soweto was burning and the footage from South Africa was like crazy, and we were living, in so far away. My parents would talk about Nelson Mandela's freedom as if it was imminent. And so we had a sense that we had a historical mandate. So that when it happened, and we were there, and South Africa was free, and we were abolishing segregation, and we were making an education department that had been one for white people, and one for colored people, and one for black people, and one for Indians. We were making that education department into one education department. And when the signs were coming down that said whites only into this part of the hospital, like when that was actually happening before my very eyes, it was like, oh, now it's our turn. This is what we were meant to do. So that sense of historical mandate was very strong in my childhood, and it was stepping into a moment in which now it was happening.